Inside Camp McCoy's labyrinth of barracks and barbed wire, uneasy peace flickered as new realities took shape for the Japanese POWs. Almost 3,000 men, Naval, Army and Air Force, crowded two compounds, not only divided by American fences, but by bitter rivalries and a wounded sense of honor. From the first arrival, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, taken at Pearl Harbor, to each fresh batch of scarred survivors, the camp was a stage for confrontation and adaptation, unlike anything many prisoners had ever imagined. Web. Japan's Navy and Army had always clashed, but here, cut off from the homeland, those lines hardened. Navy officers strode the compounds with rigid discipline, maintaining order with the force of tradition. Army loyalists, resentful of the Navy's defeat and its perceived failure to protect Japan, refused to obey their captors, sometimes as much as they refused to obey their own officers. When new prisoners arrived in later waves, they brought fresher memories and different attitudes. Newly captured men viewed surrender as less dishonorable than those who'd been held since the early days. The fault line formed between old and new arrivals, the rift deepening with every bitter cold morning. Physical divisions ran parallel to emotional ones. Germans in the adjacent compounds jeered at the Japanese through fences. Shouts and taunts peppered daily life, with Nazi prisoners openly ridiculing their former allies. The Japanese tried to remain aloof, avoiding unnecessary contact, hiding in work details, even refusing to acknowledge fellow Axis soldiers. Tensions sometimes boiled over, forcing camp administrators to issue warnings and implement new routines for security. Despite the Geneva Convention's rules, prisoners sometimes turned their animosity inward. Minor riots erupted and court-martials followed. Usually, discipline meant little more than a mild rebuke or restricted privileges. Pragmatism eventually replaced some anger. LTC Rogers, the administrator, understood that idleness bred trouble. He launched a program of constant labor and recreation. Men worked maintenance or in the hated potato fields, earning credits for the camp canteen and cigarettes. The goal was exhaustion, leaving Japanese POWs too tired to spark fights or plot escapes. If occasional scuffles broke out, Rogers focused on keeping the peace, relying not on intimidation, but on keeping spirits from drowning in resentment. If rivalry dominated the barracks, ingenuity ruled the commons. Prisoners constructed elaborate gardens from scraps and cigarette wrappers, built toys to ward off boredom, and organized dramatic performances retelling Japanese legends. Material shortages pressed every ounce of creativity into service. What couldn't be obtained was invented. Small acts sharing a song, trading a joke, reenacting traditional festivals, helped heal deep wounds when neither country nor family could reach through the wire web. Over time, the American Guards became known not as enemies, but as managers of fragile coexistence. For every episode of disruption, there were more moments of daily kindness, sharing newspapers, teaching English, even offering advice for future journeys home. The camp established a library, which stunned the prisoners with its size and selection, and for many it became a sanctuary where rivalries faded amid books, stories, and hope for learning. In place of silence, dialogue began to bloom. Work details fostered unexpected camaraderie, whether shoveling snow, repairing roads, or cultivating gardens. Men bonded through sweat and repetition, surprise friendships forming between rivals who discovered mutual respect when measured by effort, not uniform. Recurring arguments simmered, sometimes flaring up, but the ever-watchful administrators dampened them before they became dangerous. Labor transformed some prisoners, giving them purpose and a chance to shape their own environment, if only for a while. Evening routines brought respite, baseball tournaments, canteen visits, and the joy of jazz drifting from rec room radios. Through play, music, and community performances, those confined to Camp McCoy discovered that rivalry did not always end in hatred, and that dignity, even fractured, could still be rebuilt in the small acts of everyday resilience. As guards dimmed the lights and the camp settled into uneasily shared quiet, the question of legacy lingered. Would these men be remembered for their animosities, or for the strange bonds they forged in captivity's shadow? Beneath the cold silence of Wisconsin's pine forests, Camp McCoy sprawled like a forgotten scar in enemy territory, a fortress of fences, watchtowers, and rumors that gnawed at the souls of its latest arrivals. Dozens of Japanese prisoners, torn from the fury of the Pacific Front, stepped from armored trains into a world shaped by uncertainty and dread. To a man they carried an ancient prophecy. Captivity would mean humiliation, despair, and the cruel vengeance of America's victorious army. Where samurai code demanded suicide, fate had condemned them to barracks lined in wire, surrounded by strangers whose language and intentions were incomprehensible. Webb. Webuit 14. Winter 1943 painted everything in shades of grey. Snow seeped through the barracks' roofs. The air tasted of cigarettes, forbidden hopes, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. Each prisoner expected violence, degradation, and continuous punishment. Some recalled the harsh stories of Allied camps beyond the ocean, other places where men starved, froze, and turned on one another for a scrap of food or a moment's reprieve. Camp McCoy, for those first haunted nights, felt like a place built for suffering. But fate, as always, concealed its motives. In the first weeks, a strange rhythm replaced the dread. Baseball bats and battered gloves appeared as if by magic, distributed by wary guards who did not clutch their rifles but held out invitations instead. In muddy recreation yards, the crack of a bat and the flutter of a baseball cut through the silence. The Americans encouraged their prisoners to play. It seemed at first a cruel game, a trap to test their resolve, or perhaps a gesture so alien, some suspected it was an elaborate mockery. Yet the games continued. The ritual unfolded day after day. Teams formed from old rivals, Navy officers and Army infantrymen both, their enmity briefly traded for a swing at the plate. Naval officers barked orders, and Army loyalists murmured curses. But even here, in baseball's strange diplomacy, rivalry eased. The sound of laughter trickled out over the snow, confusing Japanese sentinels themselves. In time, men who saw themselves as disgraced found community in defeat and in each other. Camp McCoy's canteen became a vital arena of internal negotiation and unexpected luxury. Cigarettes, an indulgence rare in the war's closing months, made their way into hands worked raw by travel and trauma. Gum and chocolate, acquired through labor or trade, soothed nerves worn thin by fear. Some prisoners became deft artisans of barter. Others stared at wrappers and packaging, seeing in the American brands tokens of a vanished normalcy, shadows of the world before the guns. Web corridor jazz. That alien and explosive music bled from battered radios in the rec halls and mess. Glenn Miller's triumphant swing and the croon of unfamiliar brass filled every chamber with a rhythm no Japanese soldier knew. But soon, even the most aloof Navy officer found his feet tapping beneath the table. Guards offered dance steps to confuse captives, and there in the bleak heart of the Midwest, prisoners remembered how to smile. For some, music was a needle forcing out shame. For others, it became a clandestine force for survival, restoring humanity where prophecy had threatened only extinction. Prison routine held its own perversions. Men who imagined endless drudgery or backbreaking labor found their days mixed with education and play. Americans taught English grammar and Western etiquette to anyone willing. Japanese officers debated the merits of American democracy with their captors long into the night. On stages built from old crates, would-be actors retold Japanese myths and performed tragic comedies, weaving the fabric of home beneath the eyes of the men who had conquered them. Webb. Still, animosity did not vanish. Long-standing rivalries between Army and Navy simmered in every compound. The Navy, heavy with captured officers, commanded the law of the barracks, and Army loyalists bristled, refusing to follow orders from those they blamed for Japan's loss. Every meal, every game, every argument became an echo of lost battles, a contest of pride that neither barbed wire nor American leniency could fully erase. But for all its rivalries, Camp McCoy was a contradiction, a place where the prophecy of brutality did not take root. The Americans, for reasons that bewildered their captives, served steamed rice with soy sauce, replaced forks with chopsticks, and ensured medicines and dental care were routine. Even in captivity, dignity flickered, a fragile but persistent flame revived by gestures of mercy. Prisoners were allowed the illusion of normalcy. Paper flowers crafted in the mess hall, toys built from cigarette wrappers, and letters that permitted the shadow of home to survive beyond the wire web. Webahow. Outside the fence, word spread of Camp McCoy's peculiar softness, a place where America's enemy could find respect. Photographs were circulated in leaflets, showing Japanese POWs fed and playing games, a calculated tactic to coax further surrenders on distant fronts, a propaganda war waged not with threats, but with the promise of survival and dignity. Against every code that once bound these men, Webb did still. Every prisoner knew their prophecy was not so easily destroyed. Nights remained haunted. The cold, the homesickness, the humiliation of capture, these lingered sharp as the barbed wire that divided their world. On quiet evenings, men mourned their lost families, uncertain fates, and the honor denied by survival. Yet beneath it all, a question struggled forward. Had fate, in its endless cruelty, offered them a kind of grace instead? Thus begins the saga within barbed wire, a story not of relentless brutality, but of baseball, cigarettes, and jazz, where every line in the snow defies the prophecy and redefines honor itself. As winter turns to spring, and friendship blooms in the least likely places, ask yourself, what is mercy when it arrives disguised as music, games, and a moment of peace in the heart of war? When winter pressed down upon the barracks of Camp McCoy, anticipation of cruelty, bred by propaganda, tradition, and the merciless code of Bushido, met with the frost and ice of a foreign land. The Japanese POWs braced for the twisted fulfillment of every warning they had ever heard. Instead, each day revealed a paradox. Survival, not suffering, was the camp's central creed. Here, American discipline was ruthless only in its commitment to routine and order, merciful in its refusal to become a theater of punishment. Web 27 Web D4. The first shock came with the meals. Prisoners who expected little more than bread and water found bowls of steamed rice alongside soy sauce and chopsticks, a bitter contrast to the cold gruel served in many Allied camps. These small gestures, echoes of home, became lifelines to dignity. Some prisoners sobbed in private at the taste of humanity. Others met it with suspicion, searching each grain for the hidden intent they had been warned about. Was this kindness a tactic, meant to break their spirit and win the war in ways the battlefield could not? Web U, Web U, Web Q. Daily life found its rhythm. Barracks housed 50 bunks per compound, where men wrote letters to home or consoled each other in sleepless nights. The physical toll of capture was undeniable, but medical care at Camp McCoy rivaled anything they had known in civilian life. An on-site hospital and dentist treated wounds, illnesses, and abscesses with local medicines and measured patience. The older men marveled at the hygiene, stunned by the ferocious cleanliness. Even modern showers handed down with bars of soap. Not blows from a whip. Web Chinese Web tools, labor, though a point of contention, became a structure for living. Japanese POWs balked at work that seemed to aid the enemy, often refusing outright. Officers ordered strikes, and entire barracks sat motionless, risking reprisal for the sake of pride. When punishment came, it was mild, a withdrawal of privileges, a stern talk, sometimes extra chores. Camp officials leaned into negotiation, balancing Geneva Convention demands and practical realities. Recovery from battlefield wounds was honored with softer jobs, lighter shifts, and the hope of one day returning whole. Labor itself, exhausting and repetitive, dulled tempers and fostered small alliances amid the powder and snow web. Beneath the surface, rivalry churned. Army and Navy factions warred over blame, discipline, and shame, each blaming the other for lost battles. With more naval officers in the camp, command structures mirrored the divisions outside, though Army prisoners, defiant and proud, refused to obey. Navy prisoners, battered by defeat, grew resentful as their ranks swelled. Yet hope flourished in the ordinary acts of everyday living. Prisoners built gardens from scrap wood, carved toys from cigarette wrappers, and staged epic plays in makeshift theaters. These moments, stolen from time and tradition, bound adversaries together for an hour or two. Recreation took on profound intensity. Canteen credits, earned through honest work, bought cigarettes, candies, and small luxuries that lifted spirits. Baseball became a language unto itself. No longer just American distraction, it was a bridge rebuilt each weekend, a site where rivalry could produce laughter, and victory could mean more than just a run on the scoreboard. One legendary game saw the Japanese team defeat the Americans 6-4, a turn so unexpected it rippled through the compounds, setting guards and prisoners alike to laughter. For these few hours the memory of war faded, replaced by camaraderie born of play-web. Outside the fences, administration watched closely. LTC Rogers and his officers kept order with exhaustion, hoping that hard work and dignified treatment would keep riots or escape attempts at bay. When unrest threatened, they gathered representatives and negotiated peace. At every turn, the camp avoided the trap of brutal discipline, relying instead on structured compassion. Even the canteen, bathed in the glow of cigarettes and jazz, was more than just a source of goods. It became a sanctuary where men could trade stories, recall home, and bargain for a moment's happiness. Cultural expression flourished amid adversity. Prisoners recounted myths and legends in nightly performances, transforming their barracks into spaces for both nostalgia and renewal. Guarded by the routines of American life, radio jazz, movie screenings, Christmas festivities, Japanese POWs witnessed a world of forgiveness, even as wounds lingered. The library, freshly stocked, brought many to tears at its generosity. Here men who had lost everything found stories that could sustain them for another day. Wibis. Web. Beyond the wire, the story of mercy took on mythic proportions. Photographs of Japanese prisoners eating rice and playing baseball were sent to the Pacific, propaganda designed to encourage surrender. Some hardened fighters dismissed the images as lies. Others wondered if hope still lingered in the promise of life beyond suicide and defeat. Web. Yet for all the small mercies, bitterness remained. The shame of capture was not easily shed, and many prisoners refused to write home, haunted by the certainty that honor had been lost. Suicide prevention measures were strict, with guards monitoring razors and ropes. Death and despair flickered at the edges of every kindness. There was only one suicide at Camp McCoy, one more lost to the Long War, but fewer than any had feared. Proof that hope did not die completely when mercy arrived alongside discipline. Web. The final lesson of Camp McCoy's long winter whispered quietly amid the wind. Mercy, quietly distributed in rice bowls, baseball diamonds, and showers, was the ghost that haunted every prophecy. The Japanese POWs stepped into each morning stunned by what they survived, and often by what they received. The prison of war was real, yet the quality of captivity became the drum that beat against despair, defining the war's humanity as much as its violence. As spring beckoned from the edges of the snow, leaders and captives alike confronted the enduring question: was this mercy an accident of discipline, a tactic of control, or the real legacy of two nations at war? As snow melted into spring on the fields of Camp McCoy, another landscape emerged within the wire, an empire built not merely from confinement, but from complex relationships among nationalities who, just months before, were locked in ferocious battle. The transformation of the camp mirrored that of its inhabitants: German, Japanese, Italian, and Korean prisoners bound together by fate and circumstance, yet divided by memories, grudges, and relentless questions of honor. Camp McCoy had grown quickly, ceaselessly expanding compounds to shelter waves of captives shipped across oceans and continents. At its peak, more than 7,000 prisoners crowded the facility, with Japanese POWs numbering nearly 3,000, making it the largest camp of its kind in America. Living conditions, though harsh, were governed by the 1929 Geneva Convention, a set of rules meant to ensure humane treatment, but carried out with American pragmatism. Each compound brimmed with up to 50 men per barrack, Germans separated from Japanese by daunting fences. Yet proximity did little to foster camaraderie. Instead, daily life became an ongoing negotiation of rivalry, suspicion, and the indelible stains of war. The Germans, many former Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, looked down on the Japanese, openly mocking their Axis partners with crude gestures and racist jibes hurled across the yard. Their vocal confidence contrasted sharply with Japanese reserve. Japanese prisoners, disciplined by hierarchical command, sought isolation, maintaining aloof distance and refusing engagement with their noisy neighbors. Italians remained in the minority, their presence barely noticed amid louder nationalist drama. Web. For Japanese POWs, internal conflict often eclipsed even that with their supposed Axis allies. Army and Navy rivalries catalyzed constant tension. Earlier arrivals, held since the initial defeats at sea, viewed themselves as bearers of deep dishonor. Later waves, captured in the midpoint of the war, saw captivity as a grim necessity, less a surrender of soul, more a consequence of overwhelming force. That rift deepened each morning, as men remembered lost battles, vanished ships, and the ultimate failure to protect home islands, Webb. American administrators watched these struggles closely. LTC Rogers and his officers, faced with mounting unrest, implemented a schedule of labor, play, and discipline intended less as punishment, more as exhaustion. Prisoners received daily jobs: maintenance, farming in potato fields, repairs, and cleaning. These routines, grueling as they were, often transcended nationality, forcing men to work shoulder to shoulder for survival rather than for pride. Webb key. Some American officers realized quickly that idleness fueled chaos. Busy hands and tired feet left little room for conspiracy, riot, or attempted escape. The camp was a stage for constant adaptation. Daily life bristled with unfamiliar rituals, punctuated by small moments of creativity. Prisoners fashioned gardens and toys from scrap, filled downtime with performances, and decorated barracks for seasonal festivals. The generosity of the camp library, a collection so vast that it stunned many new arrivals, became a rare sanctuary, a place where differences faded into shared wonder at stories of other worlds. Webb 2. Still, tension often boiled over. Inter-service rivalries among the Japanese sometimes sparked fights, forcing the administration to issue mild punishments, withdrawal of privileges, temporary isolation. But deeper hostilities flared across national lines, especially between Germans and Japanese. Germans, emboldened by their bulk and brashness, ridiculed the disciplined Japanese with braggadocio and mimicry. Japanese dignified silence masked inner torment at their humiliations, their sense of honor bruised anew with every careless word from across the fence. Webb. The Americans, trying to keep peace, encouraged recreation and tried to soften the blows of each insult, with opportunities for sport, education, and routine. Work forged unexpected bonds. Labor assignments meant to keep minds occupied, nurtured grudging cooperation. Whether shoveling snow, digging vegetables, or building infrastructure, men of different nationalities sometimes developed mutual respect. Exhaustion blurred the edges of identity, leaving only the shared reality of endurance. Webb. Small acts of kindness, from sharing cigarettes to helping with a difficult chore, showed that even among captive adversaries, humanity could peek through. Baseball became another battlefield of pride and reconciliation. All nationalities were invited, but the Japanese quickly excelled, winning games and respect. Their victory over American guards, 6-4, earned laughter and surprised recognition even from the skeptical Germans. In these stolen hours, the divides of war lessened, replaced by the ore of play. Webb. The cultural lives of prisoners flourished subtly. Japanese staged drama and music, rediscovering traditions, while Germans held choir practices and Catholic masses. Americans facilitated these activities, understanding they kept idle hands from mischief and offered hope in a landscape otherwise painted by shame. Webb. In one poignant moment, a Christmas celebration brought together reluctant participants from every compound. For a single afternoon, differences waned, and the camp felt more like an uneasy community than an armed outpost. As spring darkened into summer, rumors of the war's end began stirring. Letters trickled in. News spread quietly between barracks. The prospect of release, redemption, and return to homeland pressed upon the mind of every captive, with questions of legacy haunting those who had suffered most from rivalry. Who would they become once the wire finally fell? Were friendships forged in adversity worth anything beyond the fence? The story of prisoners among prisoners remains a challenge, a reminder that captivity amplifies every fault line, yet insists on small redemptions in the face of hate, loss, and profound shame. Here in the heart of Wisconsin, amid snow, sweat, and fragile hope, the boundaries between victim and adversary grew porous, and the possibility of healing began to take root. As snow melted into spring on the fields of Camp McCoy, another landscape emerged within the wire, an empire built not merely from confinement, but from complex relationships among nationalities who, just months before, were locked in ferocious battle. The transformation of the camp mirrored that of its inhabitants: German, Japanese, Italian, and Korean prisoners bound together by fate and circumstance, yet divided by memories, grudges, and relentless questions of honor. Camp McCoy had grown quickly, ceaselessly expanding compounds to shelter waves of captives shipped across oceans and continents. At its peak, more than 7,000 prisoners crowded the facility, with Japanese POWs numbering nearly 3,000, making it the largest camp of its kind in America. Living conditions, though harsh, were governed by the 1929 Geneva Convention, a set of rules meant to ensure humane treatment, but carried out with American pragmatism. Each compound brimmed with up to 50 men per barrack, Germans separated from Japanese by daunting fences. Yet proximity did little to foster camaraderie. Instead, daily life became an ongoing negotiation of rivalry, suspicion, and the indelible stains of war. The Germans, many former Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, looked down on the Japanese, openly mocking their Axis partners with crude gestures and racist jibes hurled across the yard. Their vocal confidence contrasted sharply with Japanese reserve. Japanese prisoners, disciplined by hierarchical command, sought isolation, maintaining aloof distance and refusing engagement with their noisy neighbors. Italians remained in the minority, their presence barely noticed amid louder nationalist drama. Web. For Japanese POWs, internal conflict often eclipsed even that with their supposed Axis allies. Army and Navy rivalries catalyzed constant tension. Earlier arrivals, held since the initial defeats at sea, viewed themselves as bearers of deep dishonor. Later waves, captured in the midpoint of the war, saw captivity as a grim necessity, less a surrender of soul, more a consequence of overwhelming force. That rift deepened each morning, as men remembered lost battles, vanished ships, and the ultimate failure to protect home islands. American administrators watched these struggles closely. LTC Rogers and his officers, faced with mounting unrest, implemented a schedule of labor, play, and discipline intended less as punishment, more as exhaustion. Prisoners received daily jobs: maintenance, farming in potato fields, repairs, and cleaning. These routines, grueling as they were, often transcended nationality, forcing men to work shoulder to shoulder for survival rather than for pride. Key. Some American officers realized quickly that idleness fueled chaos. Busy hands and tired feet left little room for conspiracy, riot, or attempted escape. The camp was a stage for constant adaptation. Daily life bristled with unfamiliar rituals, punctuated by small moments of creativity. Prisoners fashioned gardens and toys from scrap, filled downtime with performances, and decorated barracks for seasonal festivals. The generosity of the camp library, a collection so vast that it stunned many new arrivals, became a rare sanctuary, a place where differences faded into shared wonder at stories of other worlds. Still, tension often boiled over. Inter-service rivalries among the Japanese sometimes sparked fights, forcing the administration to issue mild punishments, withdrawal of privileges, temporary isolation. But deeper hostilities flared across national lines, especially between Germans and Japanese. Germans, emboldened by their bulk and brashness, ridiculed the disciplined Japanese with braggadocio and mimicry. Japanese dignified silence masked inner torment at their humiliations, their sense of honor bruised anew with every careless word from across the fence web. The Americans, trying to keep peace, encouraged recreation and tried to soften the blows of each insult, with opportunities for sport, education, and routine. Work forged unexpected bonds. Labor assignments meant to keep minds occupied, nurtured grudging cooperation. Whether shoveling snow, digging vegetables, or building infrastructure, men of different nationalities sometimes developed mutual respect. Exhaustion blurred the edges of identity, leaving only the shared reality of endurance. Small acts of kindness, from sharing cigarettes to helping with a difficult chore, showed that even among captive adversaries, humanity could peek through. Baseball became another battlefield of pride and reconciliation. All nationalities were invited, but the Japanese quickly excelled, winning games and respect. Their victory over American guards, 6-4, earned laughter and surprised recognition even from the skeptical Germans. In these stolen hours, the divides of war lessened, replaced by the ore of playweb. The cultural lives of prisoners flourished subtly. Japanese staged drama and music, rediscovering traditions, while Germans held choir practices and Catholic masses. Americans facilitated these activities, understanding they kept idle hands from mischief and offered hope in a landscape otherwise painted by shame web. In one poignant moment, a Christmas celebration brought together reluctant participants from every compound. For a single afternoon, differences waned, and the camp felt more like an uneasy community than an armed outpost. As spring darkened into summer, rumors of the war's end began stirring. Letters trickled in. News spread quietly between barracks. The prospect of release, redemption, and return to homeland pressed upon the mind of every captive, with questions of legacy haunting those who had suffered most from rivalry. Who would they become once the wire finally fell? Were friendships forged in adversity worth anything beyond the fence? The story of prisoners among prisoners remains a challenge, a reminder that captivity amplifies every fault line, yet insists on small redemptions in the face of hate, loss, and profound shame. Here in the heart of Wisconsin, amid snow, sweat, and fragile hope, the boundaries between victim and adversary grew porous, and the possibility of healing began to take root. As the sun crested the razor wire and flooded the compounds of Camp McCoy, a world of rigid routines and quiet resistance unfolded within its bounds. Here every hour was measured, every task prescribed, and the rhythm of captivity beat as relentlessly as the Midwestern seasons themselves. Yet beneath these structures, a subtle struggle played out, a contest not only against American authority, but against the gnawing shame and conflict within the minds of the Japanese POWs. Each morning began with roll call, the formal accounting of bodies and spirits. Guards scanned faces for signs of trouble or despair, aware that beneath the surface, emotional storms brewed. Japanese prisoners, separated from the Germans and Italians by double fences and strict schedules, assembled in barracks housing 50 men, their bunks a strange comfort after months on cave floors in the Pacific. The buildings themselves were well lit and heated, a luxury that magnified the strangeness of their situation. Electric lights shone on uniforms now worn thin, hot water steamed through pipes unimagined in the front lines, and even flush toilets restored some dignity lost in war web. Yet comfort was also a taunt, a reminder of the gap between expectation and reality. Work details followed. American officers, wary of unrest, assigned kitchen patrol and maintenance to those deemed reliable. Most Japanese POWs, however, resisted labor, seeing work as aiding their captors and betraying the homeland Orders from naval officers to strike were met with determination by the army prisoners, whose warrior ethos refused compromise. When officers instructed NCOs not to work, sit-down strikes erupted. Men refused roll call, breakfast, and even standing for inspection. The camp's executive officers, such as Major Paul Johnson, negotiated tirelessly, often settling disputes without violence but relying on threats of withdrawn privileges when diplomacy failed. The Geneva Convention's protections allowed lighter jobs for the wounded and sick, with medical personnel assigned to less strenuous posts, but all prisoners were expected to put in a full day's shift. 8 hours with few exceptions. Suicide prevention remained a constant concern. Shame ran deep among captives who believed they had died as soldiers. Guards monitored razors, ropes, and even small blades, intervening quickly at the first whispers of despair. Letters home were rare, as prisoners feared disgrace more than the barbed wire itself. Yet, remarkably, only one successful suicide occurred at Camp McCoy, a testimony both to the tenuous hope offered by humane routines and the watchful administration that refused to let shame claim more. Lives a web fearful recreation brought respite, but also tension. The canteen was a crowded crossroads of nationality, a place where German, Japanese, and Italian prisoners mingled, sometimes trading insults more than goods. Cigarettes, candy, and magazines could be bought with camp credits, earned through labor or saved from allowances. Fights sometimes broke out, prompted by racist jeers or old grudges, and the Americans responded by increasing patrols and separating ringleaders. The barbershop, PX, and common rooms were flashpoints for rivalry and accidental friendship web. Baseball remained the heartbeat of Camp McCoy's recreational life. Games drew crowds, and victories over American guards worked miracles on pride and morale. When the Japanese team surprised everyone with a 6-4 win, guards and prisoners alike were stunned into laughter, proof that even in captivity, dignity could be reclaimed through play and skill web. Movie nights offered Hollywood distractions under watchful eyes. Theater performances kept culture alive, and the library, vast and well-stocked, was a sanctuary for those who sought escape through stories. Religious observance and creative pursuits further diversified the rhythms of life. Some Japanese prisoners held quiet ceremonies and staged dramas on makeshift stages. American personnel encouraged these activities, hoping they might soften animosities and keep idle hands from mischief. Germans held choir practices. Italians played cards, a tapestry of resilience weaving through every compound. Evenings brought jazz from radios, the unfamiliar music drawing out curiosity and tentative smiles. Throughout all, resistance thrived in small acts, refusal to work. Clandestine complaints, whispered doubts, and furtive letters. Americans struggled to balance discipline and understanding, knowing that leniency could breed hope, but idleness might ignite rebellion. Every season brought change, from the weary winter to the fevered anticipation of spring dinners, yet routines held firm, binding captives to a shared fate while resistance sizzled beneath the surface. The world outside the wire pressed in through newspapers and word of mouth. Allied victories and Japanese defeats colored every conversation, fueling debates and raising existential questions. Who would survive? Who would return home unchanged? The prospect of release loomed, yet for many, the routines and quiet resistance of Camp McCoy would become the crucible that either shattered or reforged their sense of self. In that uncertain valley between defeat and endurance, prisoners learned that resistance could take many forms, and that in the endless repetition of daily life, the smallest act of defiance or courage could spell the difference between despair and survival. In the waning days of the war, as rumors of surrender and victory seeped through the overgrown fields of Camp McCoy, the lives of nearly 3,000 Japanese prisoners hovered between despair and deliverance. Every footstep in the yard echoed with questions that had no easy answers. How would men who had lost everything face the possibility of return? Could shame be outlasted? Or would captivity set the shape of everything to come? For many, the end of the war caused more anxiety than hope. Some prisoners had spent years within the wire, constructing a fragile logic for existence. The routines of roll call, labor, and baseball games brought solace only as long as the threat of indefinite detention loomed. Now freedom itself was uncertain territory. What awaited beyond the camp's gates? Could a disgraced soldier find redemption in the shattered world beyond? Inside the compound, talk swirled around homecoming. Letters from Japan trickled in, relaying scraps of news from ruined cities and starving families. For some, the news brought relief, a spouse alive, a parent waiting. For others, silence confirmed every terror. Most Japanese POWs, regardless of rank, decided they would refuse to write or speak about their captivity after release. The shame of surrender marked every conversation. Tradition dictated that the only honorable end to defeat was death, not survival. Prisoners who returned home faced pariah status, the stain of having not died in battle as relentless as the cold that once gnawed at the barracks web. Try 14 Web 26 administrators. At McCoy prepared for the logistical chaos of release and repatriation. American officers coordinated with War Department officials, Red Cross personnel, and the International Committee for the Red Cross to ensure safe passage home, first by train, then by ship. Prisoners were readied in batches, their belongings and records sorted, medical checkups performed and travel papers prepared. The departure itself was bittersweet. No cheers, only long, silent lines, faces bowed to the ground. Some prisoners left small gifts, handmade paper flowers, carved wood toys, letters for those who stayed behind. Others destroyed all traces of their existence in camp, wanting no memory of their shame web. The process was fraught with bureaucratic hurdles. Shipments were sometimes delayed, and POWs often spent weeks shuttled between Camp McCoy and ports on the East Coast. Some had developed illnesses during captivity, requiring further care. Others, especially those who lengthened their stay through administrative error or disciplinary review, developed a bitter resolve. Oddly, many recounted the years at McCoy as both the worst and, in some ways, the most enlightening of their lives, proof that suffering could generate not just despair, but also moments of grace. Upon returning to Japan, former POWs faced a society ravaged by war, divided by occupation, famine, and defeat. The home they'd craved often felt alien, a country where honor was more brittle than the cities bombed into rubble. Families sometimes received them with open arms, but more often, the returned POWs were met with silent disappointment. The government, uncertain how to treat men who hadn't died for the emperor, mostly ignored their existence. Jobs were scarce, prejudices lingered, and communities whispered of disgrace. Some men found small redemptions building new lives, marrying, or dedicating themselves to service. Yet, haunting every attempt at rebuilding were the stories of those who could not go home. Deaths at Camp McCoy had been rare, suicide prevented through constant vigilance, but some men carried wounds too deep for medicine. Others, unable to reconcile the contradictions of mercy from the enemy, slipped into obscurity, never speaking of what they'd seen. A small fraction chose emigration, seeking new beginnings in foreign lands where their shame might be hidden and their spirit might recover. Web 29. The legacy of Camp McCoy persists most powerfully in the small tokens left behind. Decades later, researchers uncover harmonicas buried beneath the soil, fragile toys carefully packed among the debris, old letters lost in the shuffle of war. These objects echo the resilience of men who survived the unimaginable. The camp's library, the baseball fields, and even the barbed wire itself became hallowed ground for those who outlasted captivity, a testament to dignity, adaptability, and the strange shape of forgiveness. Historians now walk the fields of Fort McCoy, no longer a camp for prisoners, but a training ground for new American soldiers, searching for traces of its unlikely past. Interviews with the surviving guards and POWs reveal the contradictions and lessons of war, that kindness can grow in the soil of suspicion, and that mercy may be the last weapon left when every other form of hope is exhausted. Camp McCoy's mixture of routine and resistance did not fully erase the wounds of war, but it helped rewrite the language of captivity. In recent years, families of former prisoners, guards, and local workers have returned to the site. Memorials have sprouted in quiet corners. Ceremonies mark anniversaries, and the stories, once hidden or hushed, are retold with pride and doubt alike. For the descendants, redemption is now an act of memory, the slow process of reclaiming dignity for both sides of the wire web. As dusk settles on the Wisconsin Valley, one fact stands clear: Camp McCoy was not a place of simple sorrow. In the struggle for survival, against tradition and circumstance, the prisoners forged their own kind of redemption, one not sanctioned by victors or defeated, but by humanity itself. And it is here that the final chapter waits to be told, in the voices of those who found in captivity's shadow reason to hope once more. Camp McCoy's story did not end with the echoes of departing transport trains, or the silence that settled over the parade grounds after the last prisoner was gone. In fact, the truest and most complex reverberations began only then, when guards and prisoners became veterans, when a site of captivity became ground for reflection, and when the ghosts of both suffering and unlikely dignity left their mark on generations. As the war's dust settled, the fate of Camp McCoy's Japanese prisoners diverged into dozens of subtle variations. Some former POWs found their redemption unreachable, now facing an unforgiving Japan still reeling from atomic scars, defeat, and starvation. Others embraced personal reinvention. A man who once wielded a rifle became a teacher. Another found work on American farms or settled in the country that once guarded him behind wire. There were those who changed their names, those who buried memories so deep that even family could only suspect the shadows that haunted their hearts. The legacy of Camp McCoy radiated outward, into academia, through the oral histories collected by descendants, in the objects unearthed by researchers, and the pages of university theses. Each letter, artifact, and photograph bore silent witness to the strange world inside the camp. The dignity of shared baseball games, the creativity etched in hand-carved toys, the solemnity of midnight conversations about faith, loyalty, and shame, the tales of rivalry between Germans and Japanese, the uneasy peace among Italian Axis and Korean prisoners, and the role of American officers in brokering fragile truces, all came alive as historians asked new questions, challenging the easy narratives of pure suffering or redemption. Local memory proved just as complex. The towns of Sparta and Toma, once suspicious of a sudden surge of prisoners, later recalled the POWs' respectful labor on farms, their polite presence at church-organized events, the fusion of cultures in rare public baseball games and concerts. Decades later, memorials and anniversary gatherings became opportunities for reconciliation, a recognition that those years of captivity, while never easy or simple, had created ties that sometimes crossed even the deepest cultural boundaries. Civilian memories too surfaced, of German and Japanese internees who arrived from Hawaii, some of whom had been American citizens caught in the dragnet of wartime suspicion, their dreams and pain now woven into Wisconsin's own story. Academic interest surged in the twilight decades of the 20th century and into the next. University research illuminated not only the hardships, but the adaptability and humanity of those confined by war. Recent discoveries, buried harmonicas, diaries, fragments of a long-lost Red Cross bulletin, fueled new questions about justice, trauma, and the meaning of identity when shaped by both victimhood and agency. Fort McCoy's own archaeologists welcomed scholars and descendants, eager to learn from archives, to connect with a past that is not only local or national, but part of a global reckoning. Inside the old camp boundaries, memory battles silence. Some former guards and prisoners have spoken openly. Others have kept the past locked tight, fearing the misunderstanding or shame that revelation might spark. The value of dignity in captivity became a touchstone for debates far beyond Camp McCoy. At reunions of veterans, in diplomatic exchanges, and even in the halls of government, when questions about reparations or official memory flickered into public view. In recent years, the grounds of Camp McCoy itself have changed yet again, transformed back into a U.S. military base, busy with training, logistics, and preparation for new conflicts. Remnants of POW barracks are studied, not lived in. The echo of laughter across a baseball field drifts now in the minds of children and visitors on Heritage Days, not from captive men seeking unity and play. Interpretive signs offer glimpses of history, sometimes sanitized, often incomplete, but increasingly supplemented by the passionate advocacy of descendants and scholars determined to keep the full truth alive. For the survivors and their families, the legacy is more intimate but no less profound. Children and grandchildren hear stories of endurance and transformation. Some visit Wisconsin to retrace steps, touch the wire now rusted and split by trees, or place flowers at makeshift markers for friends who never made it home. Others use the story of Camp McCoy to teach about reconciliation, dignity, and the unexpected ways humanity survives even the gravest adversity. The myth and memory of Japanese POWs at Camp McCoy unsettles any simple moral reckoning. Yes, there was suffering, harsh winters, conflicts, shame that sometimes outweighed hunger or pain, but there was also unexpected grace in the respect between some prisoners and guards, the flashes of cultural union in music and theater, the way the worst predictions of brutality were untwined by cigarettes, jazz, and shared humanity. The baseball victories and library treasures linger as icons of hope, a testament to what kindness, initiative, and routine can achieve even in history's darkest shadow web. But in the end, the boundaries of Camp McCoy have become not just fences in memory, but lines of dialogue and empathy. The search for meaning in those years, through research, memorials, and pilgrimages, continues to shape understanding of what it means to be both an enemy and a neighbor, both defeated and dignified, both prisoner and survivor. Across 80 years of war and peace, those echoes still travel, defying the old prophecy of shame with stories that, against all expectation, leave us listening for mercy in the most improbable of places. If you've stood with us through the thunder of history, you know there's always more beneath the surface. Hit subscribe now and ring the bell, because every story of war, courage, and consequence deserves to be told. Join our ranks, dive deep into the untold battles, and become part of the mission to remember. Your next chapter starts here.